right. Well, we are constantly being told that President Trump wants the war in Gaza to end, but then this. Now, these two things are incongruent, right? We get these speculative stories about how President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu are at odds. And on the outs, one wants war and one doesn't. One wants civilians in Gaza to be protected, fed, not killed. The other, the man in the red tie particularly, wants the opposite of that. Don't you think it would be easy to stop the killing in Gaza? If I had a friend that was murdering people and I wanted that to stop, I wouldn't send that friend more murder weapons. Yesterday, we saw exactly what the IDF, the Israeli military, is doing with those weapons in this report from their own mouths. This comes from a group of ex-Israeli military called Breaking the Silence. This report, called The Perimeter, published just a few weeks ago, in which they detail the systemic destruction of homes and agricultural land across the Gaza border and moving inland to create this expanded buffer zone. Now, what they said, again, this is a quote from an IDF, is that they are allowed to shoot indiscriminately until the ammo runs out. So they're asked, is there anything else besides hotspots? And the soldier says, well, in a month it turned into, if you're not threatened, don't shoot, because ammo economics had set in. Suddenly the army was like, oh, crap, I need the shells for maneuver. I don't think it was a moral call until the U.S. sends more. Now, recently, Dan Cohen from Uncaptured Media told the story of Israeli soldiers who were killed in demolitions because there are booby traps. It's otherwise not a war. They're like the opposite of construction contractors going in. Instead of building things, they're just tearing it down systemically. When Israeli soldiers are killed, it's mostly by booby traps left behind with them. It's mostly one-sided. They destroy areas in Gaza without a care for civilians because, to their mind, there are no civilians. Take a look at this quote from the report. Is there talk about civilians who might be there? The Israeli soldier says there is no civilian population. They're terrorists, all of us. And the reporter says, well, that's the vibe, but what are the guides on a systemic level? Yes, there are no innocents. What business do they have coming within 500 meters of their tanks? So everything is shootable. Everything is fair game. So knowing that this is how they're operating, knowing that the United States continues to replenish their weapons, is this all a ruse? Well, Dan McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute put it this way. He says, I am increasingly suspicious about these endless Trump stood up to Netanyahu stories. There's something very manufactured here. Is that actually the case? Is it that we're being told we're trying to resist the war, but our hands are tied, so war? Is that how they're selling us? Because they can't sell us a war anymore based on merit. That's quite clear. What's happening here? Well, Dan McAdams joins us today to discuss this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you guys again.
You too, as always. So do you think that they've given up on trying to sell us this war on the merits of wanting to go after Hamas? And now it's just that we're sort of being backed into it? Like, well, Trump's trying to resist. He can't, so war.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, that's been the case with U.S. war since at least Iraq. You know, you get them in a box where there's no other option but war, and that's what happens, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, the sad thing about Trump is that he's doing essentially what Biden did. You remember the media during Biden, they kept reporting, well, Biden is getting awfully irritated with Netanyahu, the way he's killing people. Boom, here comes another plane load. I mean, the U.S. has delivered, I saw this morning, 90,000 tons of military weapons to Israel since October of 2023. In less than 2 years, 90,000 tons of weapons. There's a simple way of making yourself very clear, which is just stop those shipments. The ones that are in the midair, turn them around. You're not getting any more because this is no longer tenable. That's the difference that Trump could be, that Biden was not capable of being, or whoever was running Biden was not capable of being, and we haven't seen it yet.
Do you think there's a plausible deniability here? Like we keep hearing these stories about Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump are kind of on the outs, but you know, all of these weapons just continue to flow. It's like, look over here, like a magician, sort of look over here, but not over here, kind of sleight of hand. How many more metaphors can I mix in this thing? But plausible deniability here. That way Trump can sort of wash his hands of it. I didn't know. I'm not really a fan of Netanyahu. I didn't realize all these guys were sending all these plane loads of weapons.
Yeah, but the thing is, we get these at convenient times. Whenever the administration it needs a break, we just got some today that President Trump was interviewed, and he said, "No, I told Netanyahu this is an inconvenient time for you to attack Iran." We saw a week or so ago a lot of these reports just before he went to Saudi Arabia. Actually, we saw these reports of them being on the outs. Now, as soon as he got back from Saudi Arabia, Netanyahu, of course, said, well, Trump called me and said that he's behind me no matter what I do, everything, he completely behind me. And Trump himself said, no, there's no rift at all. So it seems like the media is reporting these things at convenient times to the administration.
To what end, though, so that we don't rise up and say this has to stop? Because it feels like I'm always fed this, maybe Trump will do it himself. Maybe the Trump administration is going to do it himself. But otherwise, do you think there would be a full-on we're seeing it in universities. At least young people care. It seems certain populations care. What could we otherwise do if we weren't sort of given this down boy?
Well, the universities, they can be written off as being a bunch of radical leftists, and to a degree they are, and so that doesn't hurt President Trump's base. In fact, it actually, if I were Trump, I'd pay them to be more radical, break more things, it benefits him. But what we're seeing actually is a rising up, quote unquote, of especially young conservative people. And you're seeing it in magazines like The American Conservative, which has published several fantastic articles lately about young conservatives, pro-life Christians like myself, who are sick of seeing children being killed in Gaza. And that's the real danger politically that Trump is facing with this. And I think that's why we're seeing some of these stories, perhaps, I'm guessing, but perhaps I'm seeing because there's more and more of it happening. There's just more and more of conservative people saying this is not right.
Do you think that this sort of handoff approach right now that Trump is, the sort of hands-off Gaza approach that he's putting in place is part of a bigger strategy to maybe distance himself from Netanyahu's plans to escalate a war in Iran? Or do you think that they're working in lockstep on this? Or do you think that this is all sort of just narrative management?
I think one of the problems that Trump has is that he thinks he's holding more cards than he is, which is ironic because that's exactly what he told Zelensky a few weeks ago. It was so well done in the Oval Office. You don't have any cards, guy. And Trump doesn't have the cards that he thinks he has. And I say this as someone who wants Trump to be successful. So this is just constructive criticism. He thinks that he can tell Putin over and over again, you have to have a ceasefire and you have to accept our terms. Well, no country in the world, when it's winning a war, will let the losing side dictate the terms of surrender. It just doesn't happen. The same is true with Israel. I don't believe Netanyahu will listen to Trump if Trump tells him to stop doing this in no uncertain terms. Because for one thing, Netanyahu very, very well understands that he has Congress in his back pocket. He has both the House and the Senate right there just waiting to do his bidding. And they've spent a lot of years investing this. So Trump could find himself completely isolated if he does anything that would really irritate or really wrong foot Israel and Netanyahu right now, because we have a Congress that simply is not serving the interests of the American people. I hate to say that, but it's true.
But what would happen if Trump said, I don't answer to Congress, I answer to the American people. They don't want to support these wars anymore. The weapons are cut off, full stop. Can we play that out, this absolute fantasy?
Yeah. No, I think it would be successful. But the problem also is that in Trump's own administration, there are people, his Secretary of Homeland Security, those are the people who keep our homeland secure. She was in Israel for Memorial Day, the day that Americans remember our soldiers and sailors and airmen and airwomen who died in past wars. She was in Israel at the Wailing Wall, celebrating Memorial Day from Israel. She's not a Secretary of State. She has nothing to do with foreign affairs. So you have an administration that's populated by people who, for some reason, for some non-understandable reason, believe that their loyalty lies with the foreign country before the United States. So he'll have problems in his own cabinet and in the people that he's appointed to do that. But it's certainly constitutionally, the president absolutely would have the power to do this. No more no more weapons. And it's been done in the past. I mean, President Reagan threatened the Israelis back in the early 80s in no uncertain terms. You need to stop what you're doing. And they did. And it's possible to do it now. And I think President Trump could do that because he has been so close to Israel in the past.
What's your sense, Dan, about this $1 trillion defense budget that, you hear from Pete Hegseth, you hear from President Trump? We're very excited. He's mentioned multiple times in speeches how excited he is for a $1 trillion defense budget. And then at the same time, you've also got now senators standing up and saying that this big, beautiful bill is not going to pass. Of course, so much of this bill, so much of this defense spending has all sorts of carve-outs for Israel and other countries and all sorts of massive boondoggle money being flowing into foreign countries. I thought we were against this. I thought this was something that Trump ran on. We were absolutely against this kind of spending.
And he reiterated this just a few days ago when he was in Saudi Arabia and gave that terrific speech. I mean, it was a great speech. No more neocons, no more interventionism. We don't need to be, the world police, what have you. It was a great speech. But then he comes home and he brags about having this massive, big, beautiful defense bill of $1 trillion. And it's not only members of the Senate that are concerned. I mean, even Elon Musk, who really, he was the energy that propelled Trump to office. Aside from Trump, the man himself, who was such a great campaigner, it was Elon's energy and enthusiasm that really got the movement going. And here he is. There's a little snippet from the interview that's coming out later this week saying, I'm very disappointed in this big bill. He said, you can have a big bill and you can have a beautiful bill, but I don't think you can have both. So he's seeing really the work that he's put in. And it was very popular. 80% of Americans loved what Doge was doing. Incredibly popular work. All of it now being tossed by the wayside, burned at the altar, as you point out, of a massively increasing, not defense bill, but military spending bill, because the military budget doesn't do anything to defend the United States. It's an offensive bill, and it's also welfare for the rich, welfare for the military industrial complex.